Good evening, friends. Been a little bit since my last video, but I kind of want to keep it as a regular habit. And one of the main problems of doing highly regular videos, like if I was to do what I was doing last year, which was doing a video every day, it ends up being very difficult to maintain. Once I miss one video in one day, it becomes very easy to just stop doing it, which is what happened. I sort of went through a phase, like maybe about 4 months, I was doing a video every single day, and then all of a sudden I stopped, and then didn't really pick up on it for a while. But other than that, weather's been a little bit strange. It's been snowing lately, which is actually pretty nice. Considering last year the snow came in very late. It came in around January, and right now we're getting snow. It came in like a couple days ago, which is nice to see. Sort of winter has come a little bit early this year, which, depending on what your feelings are about that, can obviously vary. I'm a person who generally likes winter when it is reasonable. At some points it gets a little bit difficult to deal with, especially in January, February, when it starts getting down to like -30, crazy stuff like that. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about something that I've been thinking about, something about relating to the concept of being a student. What is a student? What does it mean to be a learning person? And there's a misconception about what being a student means. And I think it needs to be clarified, because a lot of people just sort of attribute the concept of student in the more traditional and more accepted sense of just being someone who's currently in school. And I want to argue the concept of what the student means by saying that being in school doesn't make you a student. Okay? And what do I mean by that? To me, being a student is a method of life. It's a lifestyle. It's not something to consider pretentious in any way whatsoever, to call yourself, for instance, a student of life, as you might say ironically, which is a mode of living that I try to abide by, which is being a student in every facet of my being. Because being a student makes you a person that is constantly on a path of improvement. Being a student, you are constantly learning. You are constantly taking in information and developing as a person. That's what, to me, a student is. A student is learning, has a drive of curiosity to learn in every facet of their life. Whether or not that's in school is irrelevant. So, having said that, if we're going to talk a little bit more about the concept of being a student and how that ties into school, we can look at the basic outlines of the education system and talk about public education, or just private education even as well. Basically, anyone who is in high school, for the most part, and below, and definitely a large number of people who are in college, those programs are not designed to make you a student. Although we like to call people who attend those places as students, they aren't necessarily the place that happens. Specifically, in elementary and high school, there are extracurriculars within those constructs and outlier forces that make you a student, depending on the individual. But the systems that are put in place do not encourage studiousness effectively well. If we're going to talk about just a general outlook, there are many different schools and many different systems, which I don't really need to criticize them for any particular way. But generally, when we're talking about run-of-the-mill public education, the majority of people there aren't really there to learn anything on a substantial level. What they're learning is merely social interaction with other kids, If they're lucky enough to have a mentor throughout that experience, maybe a teacher who's a little bit more different and who teaches the students outside of the curriculum. These are usually like English teachers or coaches in sports and whatnot. They sort of give them an opportunity to learn outside of the curriculum, which is definitely important, but these are not things that are generally required by school systems whatsoever. They sort of happen by chance by people who are passionate to teach. So when we look at these systems of what they're teaching kids, and we have, for the most part, kids aren't really there to learn much. They're just there to get through the education process in order to get a job. And, we just want to get through high school because that's what we have to do. We're not there because we want to be there. I've never really met many students who enjoy school, although there are a few, but those are definitely the exception. There is this notion that needing to excel in school, not for the sake of learning, but merely to get good grades so that way you can proceed onwards in life. And I think that's one of the main issues, is that there isn't a necessity to learn at this point. There's only a necessity to pass or to excel, which is sort of the opposite role of what being a student entails. Being a student does not mean winning or excelling or being good at something. It's the exact opposite. It's about finding humility, being humble in yourself, and accepting what there is to be learned, right? You find a mentor or a master of a craft of some kind, and you learn all that you can. You don't expect to become to excel at this craft. You only mean to improve upon it, to improve on yourself, which is the whole function of learning, which is where we find a lot of problems in people in general, specifically, people little kids, prodigies, for instance, who excel in school. They're really bright, but then they grow up and they don't go anywhere. They become basically losers because they stop developing. They peak in high school or even earlier. Sometimes they just, get super smart in elementary school and they just wing it because of their gift, but then they don't develop it beyond that. And this is where the aspect of learning needs to be looked at more, where learning is a development process. Learning is a development process of improving upon yourself. If you're already good, or you think you're already good, there is no room to grow. There is no room to develop. There's no room to improve, and therefore you are no longer a student. You are basically dead as a person, right? And that's where I think the importance of being a student is, that you should be a student your entire life. Because if you're not developing as a human being, you have no reason to exist anymore. If you're not improving upon yourself, then why are you even here? You might as well be dead, because you have already asserted that I am at the peak of wherever I am and there's no reason to continue forward, which is perfectly fine. No one's forcing you to improve upon yourself, but you can't expect to consider yourself a living human being, because part of being a human being is moving forward. It's constantly developing yourself. It's constantly in a state of improving. And that is living in the lifestyle of a student, which I think the problem that we have now is that everyone is straying away from wanting to become a student. Although there is a resurgence of the mindset of the student, but it's merely wanting to become the best or to excel. And the problem with wanting to excel, while it is important to want to be the best because it pushes you to be somewhere, it pushes you to sort of get into the student mindset, it also solidifies you in the state that once you do attain a certain level of skill, you can sort of say to yourself, all right, that's it, I'm done, I don't need to improve anymore, which is a dangerous mentality, because it keeps you at a level that isn't to your best self. If you keep improving, then the ceiling to where you can go is limitless, right? You are limitless in terms of potential as a human. And the education system puts you in a box of where you only develop for a certain amount of time, generally until your early to mid 20s, unless you get a master's degree. And then you're supposed to say, okay, that's it. I know everything for what I need to know, and now I can start applying myself, which you should always be applying yourself anyway, because that's also how you learn in general. But you shouldn't think that because you graduated school that all of a sudden you know anything at all. And I think that's the main problem that people have, is that they think because they're in an institution where they are reflecting information from their teachers, that makes them a student. The only thing that makes you a student is your lifestyle as a student. If your lifestyle doesn't reflect the student mindset, the mindset of constantly wanting to improve upon yourself, constantly wanting to expand horizons of your knowledge, then you can't call yourself a student. I don't care what college you go to. There's plenty of people who go to college just for the degree, and that's perfectly fine. They don't intend to learn anything, or if they're learning something, they don't intend to carry that information or even consider that information to be useful whatsoever. The main reason why they are there is to get the piece of paper, is to get to the degree so they can get a job, and that's perfectly fine. Don't consider yourself a student. Don't consider yourself a person who's learning, because there's more to the degree, obviously. I kind of went into a discussion with someone about the concept of learning, because they were having an argument with me because I wasn't in school, so I wasn't considered an educated person, even though I do always study a variety of subjects just on my free time, because that's what I'm passionate about. And there's no reason for me to criticize the education system in the sense that it is there to provide a service. I just choose not to take part of that service. Sometimes I do take classes or courses in a variety of fields where I think it's necessary, but the main point is that I just want to learn for the sake of learning, for the sake of improving myself. I don't really have any desire to achieve the degree, although I guess it's kind of nice because it opens up doorways for me to get jobs and whatnot. But the main purpose of my learning is to develop myself. And then we were arguing about something related to that, and I basically gave them the ultimatum: if you had the choice between not going to school, not learning anything, but you get the degree that the school gives you, or you can go to the school, learn everything and as much as you can, but at the end of it you don't get the degree, which would you choose? And the person obviously picked the degree because that's where their values were centered on. Their values were centered not on the aspect of learning anything, but merely to get the degree so that they can get a job. And this isn't to criticize or put them down in any way, but this is just to iterate the fact that they aren't students. They aren't there to learn. They aren't there to develop themselves. They're there chasing the degree to get a good job. And I think that's a lot of people, that they just want the degree. That's why they are in college. And there's a lot of people who are also in college because they are deeply fascinated with the topics. And I think this accounts a lot for older students. You see a lot in colleges that there are older people, like in their 50s and 60s, who have already maintained a solid career, but they don't feel the need to develop in that sense anymore. They want to go back to school to learn. They want to go back to school to achieve and develop themselves. Having the piece of paper or the degree is sort of just like a threshold. It's sort of a marking place that you accomplished this. And that's the only thing it should be recognized at. It shouldn't be the goal in and of itself. It's just a checkpoint. It's just a marker that says you have achieved this level in terms of your development. It should be nothing more than that. We attach so much value to those things without really understanding what they represent. And that's kind of where I want to sort of develop myself in understanding that there is a scary thought about learning once you separate yourself from the education system, is that you don't have a marker system. You don't have a status to where you can sort of know where you are in terms of understanding things, which I guess might be intimidating for some people who want to learn on their own, that they can't really ever call themselves officially a person who is well versed in a specific sphere of knowledge because they don't have the degree to back it up. And it's a dangerous mentality. It's dangerous because it keeps you at a level of being afraid to develop, in a sense. And I think people need to ask their question of whether they are actually afraid to learn more outside of this education system. And it took me some time to realize that once I was in the schools, in the education system, in high school and in college, that I wasn't really into it. I mean, I would learn very minor things outside of classes. You know, I would read Wikipedia articles from time to time, but those were sort of hobbies or just little shoots of experience that were sort of outside the scope of my education pursuit, which is I just have to get this done because this is what I'm supposed to do. I wasn't really that inclined to absorb the information on my own accord. If someone gave me the option to just pass the course without actually taking it, I would probably have done it because I didn't really care. I didn't really care to learn anything. It was only after I dropped out of college and sort of learned the value of studying, of reading, of taking notes, of listening to people even, of watching lectures. It only happened once I left the system and realized how alone I was and how on my own I was to figuring things out, that it wasn't just on the silver platter handed out to me. And that's the other thing I think people need to get a grasp on, is learning to appreciate the education system as well. I think for a long time, I never appreciated the fact that I was there to learn things, that I was there to develop myself. I didn't really understand that concept. Even when I got older and I sort of like was told that's the reason why I needed to go to school, I didn't live it until I actually left and went on my own to learn things. I remember when I was around in grade 4 or 5, I think even younger, grade 3 or something, and I was talking to like a kid about like school sucks and whatever, and then like we both talked and we realized it's like, hey, we're here to learn things, aren't we? And I remember being like rattled, like really shook and surprised, and like having like this epiphany. It's like, oh shit, I'm at school to learn things, to prepare for life. And I didn't even like realize that was the reason why I was there. I was just there because, oh, someone told me I had to be here. I didn't actually think on a deeper level of why I was there. I just felt like, oh, this is this shitty thing I have to do every day for no reason. I have to memorize all this stuff that's not helpful to me in any way, which is another topic of education systems that we can get into another time, which is the actual, well, like what are we teaching kids that most of it is like complete like nonsense. It's kind of useless in terms of everything. The things that we should be teaching our kids is finance and running a business. That should be like the priority of anything, is just how to make money, which is, I guess, a very capitalist thing for me to think of or to support. But you got to face the reality. Whether or not you're a capitalist or not, we do live in a capitalist world. That's how the economic system functions. And if we don't even know how it functions, then what's the point of the education system? If the education system is there to move us and prepare us for life, and it's literally cutting out all the information that is necessary to actually survive in this world, that's a huge problem. and no one gives a shit about it. Like no one like people like kind of care, like when you talk about like education, like, oh yeah, we should focus more on finance. It's like, yeah, that would be cool. But then they go back to their bullshit about like free healthcare or the environment or some other shit that's like, okay, yeah, it's kind of important, but like, the main problem is that people are poor and they're completely unprepared to how to deal with things. No one even knows how to do their taxes after high school, let alone college. You have to hire an accountant to do the basic duty of a human being who has a job in your country. You don't even know how to fucking do it. It's kind of ridiculous. And there's no politician that I've ever seen that ever wants to reform education this way. Like, none of them. Like, all they talk about is, like, the environment, healthcare, the metro system. In Quebec, it's about culture and language. Just stupid shit that, like, who gives a fuck? Like, honestly, like, I guess the environment is kind of important, but that's going to be solved in the private sector. Like, that's just the reality. Like, a government's not going to be able to do anything except ban straws. Like, let's be real. I'm getting a little bit too political here, but it all kind of ties in together of being a student, of just accepting and learning different viewpoints and understanding different modes of life and modes of perspective, which I always try to do. I always listen. I may have a lot of strong opinions that I evoke online and even here, but these aren't opinions I'm married to. These aren't opinions that I'm rigidly attached to. I follow them because I feel like, okay, in this moment in time, this is what I feel like is the truth. And if something comes along and presents itself with a mode of life that I find rational and makes sense, then I'll follow it. I don't avert any kind of information. I don't avert any kind of ideology, because to avert an ideology is to be that ideology itself. It's to negate the concept of being the student, which is a concept that I always want to follow. It's a lifestyle that I always want to follow. For the rest of my life, I don't intend to ever stop learning, to never stop developing myself, because I'd rather just be dead. If I can't do that, then there's no point to living at all. If I'm going to live, I just, want to move forward. That's the whole point, to constantly improve. And then once I get old and my brain starts to crap out on me, I'll probably be stubborn and still want to continue learning, even though it's kind of redundant at that point. I'll let the natural cycle of life let me die, and that'll be it. But I'm not going to retire early. I'm not going to kill myself before my time is there by choosing to label myself as a master or as a learned man. You're never a learned person. You're always learning, no matter what. Even if you think you know everything, the world's going to make you learn, whether you like it or not. Whether you're prepared or not, you're going to have to get a hard lesson in life if you think that you can know everything. This is what happens to the prodigies that I've mentioned earlier in the video. Just trying to think of where else I can go with this topic. But learning is a lifestyle. That's all there is to it. And, I'm thinking about in finance. In finance, we have, I think I've mentioned this in another video before, but when you learn about finance and you learn about stock traders and professional traders, financial analysts and advisors and what have you, they're never called masters. They're never called professionals. Or sometimes they are, but in terms of like the underground, in terms of the underground slang that's used amongst financial people, they call them students of the market. They are students of the markets. They don't master the market. They don't master the stock market. They are constantly a student, because that's how you become a profitable financial person, is that you're constantly learning, you're constantly absorbing the information of what the market is giving you. You are constantly a student. You don't control the market controls everyone else. Everyone is the market, and all you can do is learn from the market and adapt to it. And that's the way I want to live my life, is that I don't want to control the world necessarily. I don't want to think that I'm superior to the world or to the universe, to God, that I'm constantly absorbing this information, that I'm constantly absorbing what is in the universe, what is from God, that I'm constantly a student that is learning to develop myself, that even if I attain perfection of my being, that it's just ingrained in me to constantly improve, even if I'm already at that state of perfection, which I don't think is going to happen, obviously. But even if I do attain it, I will still always strive for more, because that's the purpose of being alive. So I'm going to leave it at that, and hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you next time.